Okay, so this idea of the 1960s being this like golden era, it's actually funny because if you actually go back more, if you actually want to be more traditional, this idea of getting married for love is actually very, very new. The most common purpose of marriage in history was not to ensure that children had a mother and father, but it was to acquire advantageous in-laws and expand the family labor force. That's where this idea of illegitimate children came from, which is that if you're born out of wedlock or out of this system and it's not approved of by the in-laws, that you actually have less rights than a child born in another situation. And it is not this is not disputed at all that children born in or children that are growing up in families of conflict. I agree. If you can have a great partner, having a great partner and having a great marriage does make you happier. That's great. I think that is great to have a great little family and to not have to split up time and everybody's getting along and everybody's perfect. That's wonderful. But what happens when that does not work, which is a lot of the time? And for you to say that we should be pushing people to stay together and to work at it, even when they are not happy and when it's not working out, I don't think is a great idea. In the 1960s, women were just dousing themselves with all sorts of drugs, opiates. There was mommy's little helper, taking meth, all kinds of stuff, just to try to cope with this system. And they would even like go. There was a thing called housewife syndrome and all these things. And this is one of the reasons that actually. I mean, yeah, go for it. Fine.
Okay,
Every time.
Right.
We could quit the monologues if you want, or we can continue.
Okay.
But yours are longer. We'll say that.
I'm just more interesting, so it might seem longer to someone who can't keep up.
I think I'm more interesting for sure.
Unimpressed. Anyways, going on about this, right? The difference might be, or the difference here is, it's not just that you're saying like, oh, well, Rob says that you should try to stick it out. You should. If your number one priority, which we agreed should be to the children, then you have to understand that any two people, even if you're just roommate, are going to have conflict. There's some level of conflict. Two roommates, that's not a relationship that we care about that much. So if there's any level of conflict that seems uncomfortable whatsoever, we just say, fine, we'll just go find new roommates. Not a big deal. Once you're involved in having children, the calculus changes and you understand that conflict's inevitable. And so what you have to do is be willing to make sacrifices. I'm not saying you should stay in a relationship where you're being physically abused or something like that. But the difference is you're celebrating. Celebrating it. You're not just saying, well, you should stick with it and try to make sacrifices. That's not necessarily the right thing to do. You're saying, no, serial monogamy is the way to go. So what you do culturally is you're actually encouraging the very terrible situation that we've already agreed is something that children shouldn't have to deal with. You're saying that for any reason, any time it gets even slightly tough in a marriage, that's good. That's the norm. Serial monogamy.
I don't think people like
serial monogamy is to be preferred. Why wouldn't that be the case?
No, but people are not divorcing. People don't even break up in relationships outside of marriage because it's slightly tough. I don't know where you're getting this idea that as soon as people are like bored or their relationships are emotional, people get attached and people are not leaving. But you keep talking about physical abuse. What about emotional abuse? What about I don't know if you've heard of the Gottmans and the like contempt, criticism, all these things that make people miserable and actually make them worse parents. When you're in an unhappy relationship, you are a worse parent.
Why are we talking about why are we talking about? Let's talk about what we want specifically. So let's give a hypothetical and you tell me what your ideal situation is.
I honestly, I think the ideal situation is two parents that
No. Let me give this hypothetical and then you could respond to it. Okay. There is a man and a woman. We'll just say for the sake of argument it's the woman, but it could be the inverse. I don't give a shit. They're married, they have two kids, right? And the marriage seems happy, but one day we'll just use the woman. Again, it could be interchangeable though. She sees a new guy at the gym and says, boy, I'd really like to fuck him. So you know what? I'm done with this marriage. Do you think that's perfectly fine, seeing as how you think serial monogamy is the norm?
Well, I don't think I'll answer a hypothetical, but this is extremely, extremely, extremely rare. It is extremely rare. But I will say that if she doesn't fuck this guy and she forces herself to stay in this relationship and be miserable because for some reason this is like some really bizarre woman that really wants to leave everything because she saw a hot guy at the gym, which I'm sure is super common. You know, marriage is just nothing and people just do it, and women are just dying to separate their families because of a guy at the gym. But if she's going to be miserable in that marriage, if she's unhappy in this marriage, yes. And what's important, I think, for the children is that both parents, ideally, are still there for the child and still parent the child. That doesn't mean that they have to be together.
But notice you changed the calculus there. You said that would be tantamount to her, quote, being miserable in the marriage. So
if she's not miserable, I don't think she gets divorced. I don't think, okay, you know what? If this lady is one of the very few lady who wouldn't be miserable in the marriage, but just really wants to leave to go fuck this guy and wants to upend her whole family, then probably not. Just because, like, if I was giving her advice, like, I think it's, I'm not going to say she's not allowed to do it and it's her life. But if I was giving her advice, I'd say, are you unhappy in the marriage? No, I just really want to fuck that guy. I'd be like, okay, talk to your husband. Maybe he'll let you, maybe not. And then you can go from there.
So
but if you're not happy, it's such a crazy example. But sure,
not crazy. I'll explain why. It's not crazy. I'll explain why. You're saying that human nature is serial monogamy. So human nature would be you're in a relationship for someone 2-3 years, then you get bored of being intimate with them.
No,
so
I never said you get bored. Okay, that's not people do not state boredom as a reason for their divorce. Okay, how many people do you know that get divorced because they're bored? Boredom is not a reason for divorce.
Again, forget
conflict, infidelity, pretty high on the list.
Stop. I know you think you're on a roll here. Define the term serial monogamy.
Serial monogamy is that people go, yes, from monogamous relationship to monogamous. Sometimes, like, the average, I think, is about 7 years, but they're not leaving because they're bored. They're leaving because the relationship is now full of conflict. There's typically a lot of fighting that goes on before a divorce. There's usually actually, I think they say a year of extreme conflict, fighting, constant fights, constant issues before people break up, even out of a relationship. Everyone in the audience, I want you to stop and think. It's really great that he's in this great, wonderful, happy relationship. How many times have you guys been married or in a long-term relationship where without fighting, without the conflict, where you think to yourself, you know what, everything's great here and everything's wonderful and the family's moving, the family's just wonderful and there's no issues. I just am bored and I'm trying to move on to another partner. Serial monogamy does not mean people move on when they're bored. It just means this idea of we don't pair bond for life. We're not
cool. All right, we got them on.